Are the foods you're eating causing your body to be inflamed? Are they creating inflammation in your system that is leading to a number of other issues that you're experiencing throughout your life? This question is exactly what we are exploring on today's episode of the Exercise is Health podcast with our guest, Dr. Carolyn Williams. We're going to cue the intro song and then we're going to dive right into this conversation. Welcome to the Exercise is Health podcast, where we're talking about exercise, health, and the interconnectedness of the two. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we will be coming to you every single week from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg. Hey, what's going on, exercisers? This is Charlie. Before we dive into this week's episode, I want to let you know about a new training that's happening this week titled How to Rebuild Your Aching Body in as little as 6 weeks without changing your lifestyle. See, if you love the discussions that we have every single week on the Exercise is Health podcast, but you want more of the practical application, the details of how to take the information and apply it to your workouts, then you need to be on this training. All you have to do to get registered for free is go to secrets.exerciseforlifemethod.com. But space is limited, so make sure to get registered ASAP. Now, without further ado, let's dive into this week's episode. Hey, welcome back, exercisers, to the Exercise is Health podcast. We are your hosts, Charlie
and Julie,
and we're coming to you from our studio, Muscle Activation Schaumburg, here in Schaumburg, Illinois, where we believe that your health is your most valuable asset, and the single best thing that you can do to both boost and protect this asset is exercise. Specifically, exercise is geared towards building the health and function of your muscles. But here's the thing, exercise is not the only piece of the puzzle when it comes to your health, and especially when it comes to this idea of preventing, managing, kind of calming down inflammation within your body. Your diet can play a huge role in that as well. And that is exactly what we are talking about on today's episode with none other than Dr. Carolyn Williams. Carolyn is not only a registered dietitian and studied nutrition, she is also like many other Americans who have suffered from inflammation and didn't know it was affecting so many different aspects of her life. Her children have also suffered from it, and she made it her mission to educate herself and others, as well as coming up with healthy, nutritious meals that, most importantly, are delicious and healing. It is now her mission to share her recipes and research with as many people as she can. Well, hey, Carolyn, thank you so much for joining us and welcome to our show.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
I'm really excited for today's conversation, really focusing on food and inflammation, the relationship between the two. So I want to know, to start off, like, how do you define inflammation?
Okay, inflammation, it's really gotten a bad connotation, I think, particularly lately in the media. But as it was designed for our body, it's not really a bad thing. It's a good thing. It's there to heal our bodies, repair our bodies, and to protect our bodies. We see it all the time. You see it with, like, you sprain your ankle and it swells and it hurts, and that's inflammation, and that's a good thing. That means your tissues are responding, your white blood cells and compounds are rushing in to start the healing process. And, slowly it goes away. And that's what it's supposed to do. Same for like a paper cut. It hurts, it's red, it's painful, but after a day or two, that slowly dissipates. And that's a good thing. That is how it's supposed to work. Same like with a fever. You see this a lot with kids. They'll just have a fever for one day and then it goes away. Well, that's inflammation at work that's spiking that fever, and it's fighting off the bad things to protect your body, and it goes away. So that's how inflammation was designed to work technically. And, probably, and how it did work most of the time until we got so modernized in our society. And the key with that good inflammation is that it goes away. So you'll hear it referred to as acute inflammation. What we are referring to today, and what has the negative connotation and should, is the low-grade chronic inflammation. And it is inflammation that is primarily triggered by lifestyle irritants. A lot come from your diet, but also, a sedentary lifestyle, smoking, not getting enough sleep, stress can be a huge cause of inflammation. And this is more subtle inflammation. It's not, the signs are not as overt. You don't have this big swelling of your arm with low-grade chronic inflammation like you might with an ankle or something. It's hard to recognize, it's hard to see because it's subtle, but it sticks around and it doesn't go away. Mm-hmm. And inflammation is a response, no matter if it's good or bad inflammation, acute or chronic. Inflammation is a response by the immune system. So the problem with this low-grade chronic inflammation is a lot of people don't realize they have these early, symptoms of low-grade inflammation. And it starts to take a toll on the immune system because it's an immune reaction. So what's happening is, unless you address that low-grade chronic inflammation, it's overworking your immune system because it's just constantly running in the background. So when you come into contact with things that really need healing or really need fighting off, your immune system isn't working at 100% capacity to do that. But also when you have inflammation, I'm a very visual person. And so when I was knee deep in all this inflammation research, I really just had to figure out a way to visualize this in my head, if you will. And I saw an analogy once that talked about low-grade chronic inflammation, like an initial, onset or just a little low-grade chronic inflammation is like a small fire in your body. And I think that's a great analogy because it's like a small fire, and that small fire, it's okay. It's probably not causing any, big symptoms or anything, maybe some little subtle things, but never anything you'd think to go to the doctor about. Just kind of annoying things that aren't your norm. But what it does is it kind of makes your body a little more irritated or hypersensitive. So your body is a little more prone to maybe being irritated by other things. And so then you have another small little fire and another, and before you know it, this can lead to systemic inflammation.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I just want to highlight a few of the things that you said, because I think they're really crucial points for people to understand. Number one, inflammation in and of itself is not necessarily a bad thing. Like, it's a necessary thing within our bodies in order for us to be healthy. It's part of the whole recovery process and everything like that.
Yes, exactly.
And the thing is like you said, like now the idea of inflammation becomes so sensationalized, where it's like, it's always a bad thing. And it's like, oh, you're experiencing this issues. Well, that's because of inflammation. It's like, like the number one scapegoat that's thrown out for all the different things that we're experiencing. And it may very well be a contributor, but the fact of the matter is, it's in a lot of ways very necessary for us as well. So I really appreciate you highlighting that. And I also appreciate you highlighting the fact that inflammation is not necessarily like a thing. It's like a process. And so, right. And so, so many people will be
it's not a condition or a diagnosis.
Yeah.
It's like this thing running in the background of your body almost, like a motor almost, if you will.
Yeah. And I think it's really important for people to realize, because look, there's a lot of stuff out there that'll be like, well, this rubs out the inflammation, or this knocks out it's like, okay, yeah, but it's not it's a process. So there's like, what phase of it, what steps of the inflammation, like what exactly are we talking about? And so I just appreciate you really highlighting those different things so we can understand, one, the role of inflammation for us actually to be healthy. And two, we can be a little bit more guarded against the ideas of like, oh, well, this like knocks out inflammation. So, that has to be a good thing or stuff like that. So yeah, thank you for highlighting those things. Some stuff that you brought up was, hey, like our lifestyles can contribute to this a whole bunch. And I know one of your expertise in regards to inflammation is looking at food. So like, how can the foods that we eat actually, lead to more of a pro-inflammatory environment within our bodies?
Yeah. So lifestyle is the main cause of these irritants that trigger this low-grade inflammation, and diet is certainly a key player. And, it's just, we have so many compounds, toxins, chemicals, just junk in our food that was never there to begin with. So we're getting this abundance of chemicals, dyes, colorings, additives, all that kind of stuff in our food. And any of that can enter the body and act as an irritant. Now, the other thing at play with diet and inflammation is a lot of these foods that we associate with causing inflammation, like your processed foods and artificial colors and artificial sweeteners. And a lot of these foods disrupt our microbiome, our gut health. And I think, a lot of people know we need a healthy gut, but maybe not necessarily how that's directly tied to their health. Well, that when you have a quote unquote healthy gut, you have a diverse and varied supply of good, beneficial bacteria and harmful ones. But the beneficial ones keep the other ones in check. That's how it's supposed to work. And what a lot of people don't realize is that balance of good and bad bacteria, they form a protective lining within your intestines. So when you eat food and you've broken the food down, you're digesting the carbs and the proteins and the fats, and you've got the vitamins and minerals, that microbiome, those bacteria, form a protective lining within the gut that allow the good stuff, the nutrients, to get through the intestinal walls into the bloodstream. But they protect a lot of the junk, the irritants, from entering the bloodstream into our body, where they can lead to irritation and inflammation. Now, when our gut is disrupted, we take antibiotics, we eat a lot of processed foods, a lot of things that disrupt our gut. That microbial lining in the gut doesn't work as well. It's got gaps in it. It's leaky, which is where you may hear leaky gut. So because of that, now all the good stuff from what you're eating is entering the bloodstream, but because of those gaps or leaks, a lot of the irritants can enter the body now too, which leads to inflammation. So it really kind of starts with the gut health, but then, it just cascades from there.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I like the word irritant that you keep coming back to. And I think, so many of us can relate to having little irritants, throughout our day. And it's like, you talk about, if it's just like one little irritant, it's no big deal. But when it's a constant irritation, or it's this and then that, and then this and then that, and then all of a sudden it's like, I'm about to lose my mind because of everything that's coming up. And so when you think of it that way, it's like, okay, this little bit of inflammation over here, it's like whatever. And then over here, it's like, okay. And then before you know it, all these little irritants and all this little inflammation turns into this big thing of inflammation, which is what you were describing with the little fires analogy. When we relate it back to food, it makes so much sense. How it's just like, okay, the foods that are just, there are parts of the food that maybe our body just can't quite process. They just cause a little bit of disruption that gets compounded over time. We, also, add that to other aspects of our lifestyle that aren't up to par or, as they should be. And all of a sudden we have, a giant mess in front of us.
Yeah,
so that makes total sense. So then on the flip side of that, how can we use our food to actually start to calm down some inflammation?
Yeah. So I've talked about food and, how it can cause inflammation or contribute to inflammation. But on the flip side, there are a lot of foods actually that have really potent anti-inflammatory properties, either through their they have direct anti-inflammatory action, or they have antioxidant properties or protective properties that prevent, mutations of cells. But there are so many foods that most of us are not getting on a daily basis that can protect or, put out some of this inflammation. So it's kind of like we're probably all getting a lot more of those irritants in our diet than we need that cause or contribute inflammation. But at the same time, we're not getting near enough of those ones that put it out or prevent it.
I remember in my nutrition class in grad school, I had only had one nutrition class, but I remember distinctly my professor saying, look, it's one thing, if you're eating all the junk, but if you're eating the junk and you're also making sure that, you're getting in your fruits and your vegetables, like all that junk becomes way less detrimental because you're at least giving yourself some kind of baseline to protect yourself against. So with that in mind, like, how do you recommend people start incorporating? Is it as simple as just like eating more fruits and vegetables, or are there certain things that you would recommend people doing to start incorporating more of these foods within their diet?
Yeah, well, the first place I tell people to start, and, usually they come to me and they're like, okay, what do I need to cut out? And I really rein them back in. I think that goes back to like just diet culture. And we think in order to get healthier, we have to cut stuff out. But I really try to refocus them and say, okay, before we look at stuff that is causing irritation or inflammation in your diet, let's focus on what you need to add to your diet. And again, when I was going through the research, there were 3 groups or categories of food that just rose to the top above all the other foods out there. I mean, they kind of got annoying. They were so like reoccurring and strong research articles out there. So the first one is leafy greens.
Okay.
And so any kind of leafy green, it can be cooked, it can be raw. Obviously, usually, the darker ones are a little more, have more nutrients and anti-inflammatory, antioxidant compounds in them, but just get in a cup a day, Just aim for that, or at least 6 days a week. And a lot of people think this has to be salads. It doesn't have to be salads. It can be you throw a handful in your smoothie. You put some on your sandwich. I will even sometimes stir like baby spinach into soup, or like a spaghetti sauce or saucy skillet dish. So that's the first one. The second one is berries, fresh or frozen. Get 2 to 3 cups in a week. And that's a pretty easy one. To do.
So a week is super. Way easier.
Yeah. So berries are by far the most potent anti-inflammatory, fruit you can get in. So really focusing on those. Frozen is fine. Frozen can sometimes even have more nutrients in it because they're frozen right after they're picked. Yeah. And then the third category are cruciferous vegetables. And I tell people, if it stinks while it's cooking, if it's a vegetable that stinks while it's cooking, it's usually a cruciferous vegetable. So think like broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprout, kale. The sulfur compounds that usually don't smell great actually have a lot of power to them. So getting in cruciferous 4 to 5 times a week, that's really where I tell people to start. And what you find is that if people get in the habit of adding those, some people, they just focus on one of those. That's all they can do. Just focus on one and then add another. But once you've gotten the hang of, getting the 3 of those groups in, what you find is that automatically cleans up people's diet some.
Sure.
And so then we can turn our attention to, okay, what irritants do we have in the diet? What do we need to look at it minimizing or easing out, that kind of thing. But because your diet's already cleaned up a little, it was more doable.
Totally. Yeah, that makes sense. And I love that. So leafy greens, berries, cruciferous vegetables, that's very strange. What I liked was you weren't like, it has to be done every single day. It's like, 4 to 5 days a week, 2 to 3 cups a week, it's like, okay, cool. Like that's totally feasible for most people. I feel like, especially when you're thinking about throwing it into a smoothie, blending it all together, it doesn't have to be a huge effort in order to get these in.
Right. Exactly.
That's awesome. Well, hey, Carolyn, thank you so much for all this information. This is just really, really important. And honestly, I find it fascinating. So tell me, where can people find out more about your work? How can people connect with you?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I am most active on social media on Instagram, and my handle is realfoodreallife_RD.
Awesome.
You can search Carolyn Williams and I should pop up. And then my website's carolynwilliamsrd.com. And they can find my new cookbook, Meals That Heal, One-Pot, at any major retailer, online, in-store, Amazon, all your major places.
Perfect. I love it. We're going to link to all of those in the show notes so people can find them all there. Carolyn, the question that we like wrapping up with for all of our guests is, what is your definition of health?
Yeah, I have to say it has really shifted over the past 10 years or so. Early in my career, I was so focused on nutrition and exercise. And now it really is today for me having balance in all facets of health. I've really had to incorporate more of the mind, body, and just slowing down and sleep. Sleep is probably my number one health priority, because if I don't get good sleep, then I'm not going to make the best health choices. I'm not going to get my workout in like I would have if I had a good night's sleep. I might be able to handle stress as well. So really more just a balance of all those facets of health, versus how I was in my 20s and early 30s, when it was just all about nutrition was the top priority, as well as exercise, and that's all that mattered.
Yeah, no, for sure. For sure. It's incredible how much of a difference you feel when you consistently get good sleep, and when you consistently
Oh my gosh.
don't try to like stress yourself about being perfect in certain areas, but just be like, okay, I'm just going to be, well-rounded from a health standpoint. Most of the time eat good food, most of the time moving, trying to prioritize my sleep, staying hydrated, all that stuff. Just what a difference that makes when you do it consistently.
Yes. And not trying to be a perfectionist. That was my
Good.
issue probably,
Right?
So yeah.
Awesome. Well, Carolyn, thank you so much for joining us. This was an amazing conversation. Looking forward to not only continuing to learn more about your work, but helping you to spread the message of making sure that they're eating the right foods, helping to making sure we are managing our inflammation through what we're eating, through our lifestyles and everything like that, because it's really important. So thank you for all that you do.
Thank you. I enjoyed talking with you.
Wow, how awesome was that episode? Did Dr. Carolyn share some incredible information about not only the foods we eat, but how our body responds and reacts to them and the issues they may be causing within our system? Hey, if you liked today's episode, be sure to share it with somebody else who you think may enjoy it, and be sure to follow Dr. Carolyn on Instagram, as well as check out her website and purchase her cookbook. And while you're online, head on over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a rating and review. It helps people find this podcast when they're looking for information on exercise and when they're looking for information on health. So if you found value in this conversation today, let us know by leaving us that 5-star rating and review. Well, thanks so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. Have a fantastic week, and we'll talk with you all next week. So what'd you think about that episode? Did you find the information useful? If you enjoyed what we discussed during today's episode of the Exercise is Health podcast, then you are going to love what I'm going to be presenting during my new training, How to Rebuild Your Aching Body in as little as 6 weeks without changing your lifestyle. It's happening this week, and you can get registered for free by going to secrets.exerciseforlifemethod.com. But space is limited, so you need to head there now. secrets.exerciseforlifemethod.com, and I can't wait to see you there. This podcast is for information purposes only. The statements and views on this podcast are not medical advice. This podcast, including Julie and Charlie Gates, disclaim responsibility for any possible adverse effects from the use of information contained herein. Opinions of guests are their own, and this podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about guest qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements or advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have a direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. If you think you have a medical issue, consult a licensed physician.